And every gang has two arms. It has a militant, violent, war-making arm. This is the one most people concentrate on. But if you take this arm out, I'll grow another one, because another generation is waiting to step up here.
Los Angeles Sheriff's Deputy Sergeant Richard Valdemar served most of his 33 years on the force of fighting LA gangs. He was one of the original 12 deputies who founded and developed the Sheriff's Department's Operation Safe Streets anti-gang unit. We'll find out why he's given up on California and fled to Arizona, next on Full Disclosure. Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're going to bring you the news behind the news on this part one of our interview with retired LA County Sheriff Sergeant Richard Valdemar. Mr. Valdemar is an internationally known expert on gangs and has been a regular law enforcement trainer and instructor for many city, state, and national agencies. He's been featured in many television broadcasts on the gang problem and written several articles for various publications. We asked him to give us a brief history of his background and his training.
Well, I was born in Compton, California, and I'm a product of Compton City Schools. I attended Compton High School, graduated in 1965. I was somewhat of an activist politically. There wasn't a Hispanic movement at the time. It was more a civil rights movement, so I was very active in that when I tried to be anyway at 17 years old. I was concerned about young people. I saw a lot of gang activity and drug activity in my community, so I tried to get involved in some kind of a pro-active anti-gang, anti-troubled kid type organization. I joined the Catholic Youth Organization at my local parish, and I wound up being the youth director of the Culver Teen Center, which was a teen center for kids in my neighborhood, aimed at giving them an alternative to hanging out in the street. And it was run by the Federal Federation of Settlements and Centers, which was the War on Poverty program, and the Catholic Youth Organization. And I was a paid employee of that program. I was very active. LA City Schools picked me out in my junior and senior year in high school and sent me to some youth training schools where I learned to be an activist, a leader, and I was. And eventually from that they took me to be interviewed by the County Board of Human Relations, Dr. Julian Nava, who was running that at the time. And they selected me, and I went to New York and then eventually to Puerto Rico in an international Spanish-speaking youth conference. And I was one of the youngest. I was 18, just graduated. And most of the people there were college students. And people there were mostly of the liberal bent, which was what I was also. And they were, many of them intended to go from there into Cuba and cut sugar cane for Castro at the time.
What year was this?
This is 1965. My claim to fame was that I was talking about the urban situation in the Watts-Willowbrook area, and that there was a possibility of rioting because of the disparity, the feeling of neglect from the community, and the animosity they held towards the police. That's Compton Police, LAPD, and the LA County Sheriff's Department, whose jurisdiction I ran the center in. The Black Panther headquarters was about 2 blocks away from me, and we were also influenced by some of their thinking. So I returned in August of 1965 from Puerto Rico, and indeed we had the Watts riots. So the County Board of Human Relations, Dr. Julian Nava, asked me to be interviewed, and I was interviewed on the committee that was studying some of the causes of the rioting. I became disillusioned with that. There was many reasons for that. One was that we had tried to get petitions to get parks and all these kind of things. We tried the legal route to get improvements done in our community, and we received nothing. But the rioters who burned and rioted and looted, they received, you know, government money immediately thereafter. They built some of those streets back up that had been burned down. That was a horrible riot. I mean, I've been in most of the riots since then as a police officer, and there was nothing like the '65 riots. It was very radical time, very violent time. Tanks rolling down your street, you know, firing, and buildings burning all around my neighborhood. It was very ugly.
The horror of the LA riots taught Richard Valdemar about the fragility of civilization and the need for law and order. With his new social consciousness and maturity, he joined the U.S. Army.
I went into the service in 1966. Of all things, you know, the Army has a funny way of, if you're a cook, they make you a mechanic, and if you're a mechanic, they make you a cook. Well, they made me a cop. They sent me to the Military Police Academy, and there wasn't too many minorities in the Military Police Academy, and a few of us got in, passed, and I was very happy about that. My father had been a military policeman for a time in World War II, and so I was very proud of that, and I got sent to Vietnam immediately. And I went to Vietnam, and I served in 504th Military Police in Vietnam for a year. One thing I noticed in Vietnam was that we had gang members in the military. You know, some of them were very good soldiers. Some of the aspects, qualities that they possessed that made them good gang members, when converted over to loyalty to the United States, became positive assets for them to be good soldiers. I have a friend who's a Marine Corps DI, and he says USMC stands for Uncle Sam's Mexican Children, because there's so many of them fighting in Vietnam, and they were very good soldiers.
So this reformed radical came back to the United States with a new attitude. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll see how Richard Valdemar turned his prior activism into a crusade for law enforcement when he joined the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. We'll be right back.
Controversial, who stopped the Clinton impeachment campaign.
I literally brought the nation to a stop.
Informative.
The overall cost is some of the figures I've seen in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Entertaining.
They're playing a fool's game.
You're absolutely wrong there. Only 23% of Latino voters voted for that measure.
Full Disclosure, TV's best public affairs program, is seen throughout California. For channel numbers, airtimes, and streaming video, go to fulldisclosure.net. The news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with Richard Valdemar, who was telling us about his transition from a Hispanic activist to an anti-gang cop.
When I returned to the United States, I was stationed at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and I served there the remainder of my 3-year tour, you know, in the military. And then I came out. One of my friends was going to join the Sheriff's Department. Now, my experience with the Sheriff's Department had been very negative. But I had now been a military policeman, and I thought, maybe I could do this. So I took the test, I qualified, passed the sheriff's exams, and eventually went to the Sheriff's Department, joined the Sheriff's Department in 1970, and went through the academy. While I was going through the academy, we had another series of riots, civil disturbances, called the moratorium riots, many of them in East Los Angeles. Because I was fluent in communist, they selected me out of the academy and put me undercover. I worked undercover in the Brown Beret organization. If you're not familiar with that, the Brown Berets were the brown version of the Black Panthers. And I also worked in the Revolutionary Communist Party undercover.
The mid-60s was a time of conflict. There were dozens of anti-government groups that were actively working to subvert the system. Richard Valdemar was right in the middle of it all.
You know, the Panthers were very active. The Brown Berets were still active. There was AIM, American Indian Movement. There was the Weather Underground. All these groups were still active at the time. So I had hoped for a career in intelligence, but like all good deputy sheriffs, when I graduated from the academy, I went to the Los Angeles County Jail, and I worked 4 years in the custody division, which at the time I thought was a waste of my talent. Of course, that's not true at all. in the custody division is where police officers get matured. They learn how to deal with people on a one-to-one basis. You don't have a gun and a stick and any weapons. You're outnumbered by the inmates that populate the jail, and they're all rule breakers and outlaws, and you have to get them to comply with the rules and the regulations of the jail. So you have to learn to use what I call your primary weapon, your brain, and your secondary weapon, your mouth. Learn to talk to people, get them to comply with things you need them to do for their own good, and let them know that you're fair, firm, and all that. I think that's our advantage over LAPD. You see, LAPD gets the boot camp military training at the academy, that same one we do. But when they go to the field directly with that attitude, it grates against the community. While we go to the jail, we mellow out a little bit, and we get fooled, lied to, tricked, and, all these things happen to us in the jail in a fairly safe environment, so that when we go out to the street, you're not going to pull the same tricks on us. On the other hand, we're a lot easier to deal with for the public because some of those hard corners have been knocked off. So I think that was our advantage.
After seasoning by his work in the LA County Jail, Richard Valdemar was sent to the streets of East LA.
So I leave the jail in 1974, and I go to East Los Angeles. And it had some reputation for being a gang area. And I had my patrol training in East Los Angeles. I loved it there. The wonderful people there. What a community. People came to my aid, which didn't happen in my neighborhood. Like as a policeman was in trouble, people would come to your aid. I understood the gang members. I didn't agree with what they did, but there were, even in those days, there were rules about what a gang member could do. You don't shoot at people when they're with their mother and or their baby. You don't shoot at people while they're having a funeral. You don't write on the church wall. These were all rules that gang members accepted. So within those rules, we were able to deal with most of these gang members, not in a friendly way, but a respectful way. So I grew up in that era.
His growth within the Sheriff's Department was due in large credit to his training officer, Duncan Jeffries.
My training officer was an outstanding officer. He was a white officer, but the community, he was so popular that the neighborhoods used to claim him as their own. His name is Duncan Jeffries, and I would go later on to a neighborhood and I'd say, "Hey, did you know Duncan Jeffries?" And they go, "Sure. He lived right up on the hill here. He was a friend of mine." And then they'd make up a story because they all loved him so much. So after I got off training, it took a while to realize that every kid that was waving at us as we went by was not waving at us. They were waving at Duncan Jeffries, because most police they didn't wave at. So he was a great influence in my life and gave me that positive community, completely different from what I'd been taught in school, what the police officers were like. Now I see a real policeman and work with him, and he's an angel.
What was so different about Sheriff Deputy Jeffries? What made him such an exemplary training officer, we asked him.
He enforced the spirit of the law, and sometimes not the letter of the law. What was right is what he enforced. He was not a weakling. He would help little old ladies because they were somebody's mother. He knew what was fair and what was not fair, and when the people of East Los Angeles told him about a problem, they expected him to solve it, and they knew that it would be a fair for all solution. There's stories about that in the Joseph Wambaugh's books, where he marries people and divorces them and things like. Well, that's the kind of thing Duncan would do. Have you put your hand on his badge and say, "Okay, you guys are divorced for tonight. Go home, to your parents' house, and after you sober up, come on back," and that kind of thing. And taking care of kids. I knew drug addicts who had him baptize their kids, because he was so good. He was a good man.
After being trained by this ideal role model, Richard Valdemar was ready to hit the streets on his own. As fate would have it, he was assigned to patrol his old neighborhood.
So eventually, a new station opened up called Linwood. We took over the city of Linwood, and that new area, proposed area, included my own neighborhood, Willowbrook. And so in 1976, I signed up and I went to Willowbrook and I worked in my own neighborhood. Now, my father still lived there, some of my family members. So people say, well, you can't be a policeman in the city that you live. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. That's part of the problem I think we're having right now. Policemen now, most of them live outside the area, and I don't blame them. I don't want my kids going to LA City schools, right? So I have to live in Orange County. I have to live in Ventura. I have to live in somewhere in San Bernardino because I don't want my kids going to the schools because of what they've become. It's just not safe. So as a policeman, you know that. So that's what's happening. But at the time, I didn't have any kids in school. So my father lived there, and the gang members all knew me because we grew up together, and they knew me from the teen center. But they knew me to be a square guy, a straight guy. So I didn't have the problem that some other police officers had, where they had been, associated with gangs. They had smoked dope with these guys. They had, done other things with these guys, and then had become police officers. Well, that's not acceptable. And the gang members know it's not acceptable for them either.
In policing his own neighborhood, we asked Richard, what did he do to make it better?
I tried to get involved in the gang stuff. You couldn't help it in Compton. Compton Willowbrook was, just Crips and the Bloods were born there. Hispanics have been there for generations. So I worked them. Eventually, in December of 1978, the Sheriff's Department did an experimental program, a gang program it was originally called the Hickory Street program because it started on Hickory Street. But eventually they called it Operation Safe Streets, OSS. I was one of the original 12 officers selected to work this gang unit. And really, it was a revolutionary concept. And it was the most effective gang program in the nation. Everybody imitated us for a while because it was so successful. People say there will always be gangs. If you let them, there will always be gangs. But there doesn't have to always be gangs. The first target gang we had was the Compton Barrio Tres, CB3. They don't exist anymore. They exist in other cities. They don't exist in Compton. The Paragons were the second gang we targeted. They don't exist anymore. The Palm and Oak Crips were the next gang we targeted. They don't exist anymore. Now, how do we do that? Well, we did it because we changed the way we operated with gangs. Prior to this, the method that policemen used to target gangs were saturation patrol, they call it, where they flood a troubled area with as many police officers as they can, make as many arrests and FIRs, field interview reports, of anybody who might even look like they might become a gangster. Well, that doesn't work, never has worked, never will work. All that does is turn the community against the police. But that is the method that the Sheriff's Department has fallen back on, and that is the method that LAPD uses, and they're failed systems.
Failed systems, he said. What caused them to fail? We asked gang specialist Richard Valdemar to explain the correct concept of Operation Safe Streets.
The concept was great. This guy named Curtis Jackson invented the process. That was that instead of concentrating on all the gangs in Los Angeles, he picked one gang, the Hickory Street Gang. And first thing he did was gather intelligence. He gathered all the intelligence he could about all the members of Hickory Street Gang. Okay? And then they became his target. And he targeted that gang alone, and whether they were the victims, the suspects, or whatever. If they sniffed paint, or if they're involved in a murder, everything that were involved criminally about that gang, he took on. And what that does is it allows you to know the structure of the gang, which is very loose in Southern California. There's no president, vice president. So the programs that are developed in New York and Chicago, they don't work on our gangs. That's why New York and Chicago are having trouble with our gangs, because their programs are based on the model that you see back east, which is pyramid structure with a president, the vice president. There's a war council. There's different ranks within the LA County gangs. Don't have ranks. Everybody's equal. It's supposed to be a democratic organization. So it's like the communist cells. You can't take off the head and expect the thing to fall apart. You have to break the cells up one by one until you make the thing weaker. You're only aiming to make it weaker at first. So what you do is you target this Hickory Street gang. It gets weaker and weaker because you're putting away their major players, their shooters, their violence-prone people. And every gang has two arms. It has a militant, violent, war-making arm. This is the one most people concentrate on. But if you take this arm out, I'll grow another one, because another generation is waiting to step up here. And so you take this arm off constantly, you're not solving the problem. You have to take the second arm. The second arm is the money-making arm. This is what finances the gang. You cannot attack the gang unless you can destroy the money-making arm. Usually we're talking about drugs. So what we did for years as a gang unit was we concentrated on this arm, never followed the arm back to its source, because they said narcotics is for the narcotics officers. Gangs work gangs. Well, anybody with an ounce of common sense knows that gangs operate through the sale of drugs. They buy their guns, they buy their weapons, they buy their whole genre from the sale of drugs. So it was ridiculous not to work drugs, but that's what happened. Anyway, so if you do this with the gang, it becomes weaker and weaker, and then the surrounding gangs, who are its traditional enemies, will attack them. When they do, they become targets of the OSS, because remember I said they're either as victims or as suspects. Any gang-related incident becomes a case that you would handle. In that way, we had a safe zone, and then it increased and increased and increased until we had a major part of the city under our control. You never give up the first gang, but you never give up any territory that you make safe.
Richard Valdemar called upon his experience as a Vietnam veteran to understand the effective difference of saturation patrols versus his OSS experience.
It's like the Vietnam War. We lost that war because we tried to win that way. Saturation bombing. We used, we'd take a hill and then we'd leave, and overnight the enemy would take the hill back. So we'd have to take it a second time and a third time at the great cost of human lives, that we suffered. So what you do is when you take the hill, you never give that hill back to them. You take the hill, in this case that particular Hickory Street where they lived, and you maintain it. That is, after you take out the main players, and by taking them out I mean send them to prison. Right? You take out the main players, you stay there, and then you just expand the territory until you have more and more territory that is safer. It's never going to be completely safe. It'll be a lot safer. The community enjoyed that, but what happened next was our politicians got involved.
And so the politicians got involved and things got screwed up. We'll find out what went wrong when we come right back.
In the government, there's a phrase used to restrict access to information. That phrase, need to know. At fulldisclosure.net, we want you to have all the information you need to be an informed citizen, unlimited access to all the information we've gathered on our TV show. And if you can't watch us on your local cable station, streaming video of complete shows when you want them. Fulldisclosure.net, when you need to know the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with the retired Sheriff Sergeant and Gang Specialist Richard Valdemar. Richard was describing how the successful OSS, or Operation Safe Streets, worked. And then he told us how elected officials destroyed its effectiveness.
It was such a successful program in Compton that Paramount decided that they wanted that program. But the County of Los Angeles wasn't willing to fund another program and send it over to Paramount. What they did was they stole us and sent us to Paramount. So all the intelligence that we had gathered and the fact that we were trying to hold down this area as a safe place was wasted, because now gangs returned to Compton and now we're ineffective in Paramount or any other city. I just used Paramount for an example that time. So this is what they're doing now. The sheriff is sending his teams out to put out fires all over the county area. Absolutely ineffective. He didn't learn anything from the Operation Safe Streets program. And the people he put in charge of the Operation Safe Streets program don't know what the program is supposed to do, and so they misuse the tool. It's a wonderful tool, but it's not being used properly.
At one time, was it illegal to belong to a gang?
It is illegal now.
It is.
186.22 of the Penal Code says you can't belong to a gang, a criminal gang. But it's an enhancement. So what you have to do is you commit a crime, and then the additional enhancement is that you're a member of a gang. So in that way it's against the law. But that hasn't prevented one single gang member from being a gang member.
So not only is the law ineffective, but the enforcement effort is also wasting its resources.
And so we began to imitate LAPD's crash program. Well, that was a failed program as well. So, the guys that work there are wonderful people. That you actually give up part of your career when you go to become a gang officer. It's the worst hours, right? It's working in the worst places with the worst kind of people. And the track to promotion in our sheriff's department is not through the detective division. Promotion is through administration, community relations, custody. That'll get you to the top and promoted. You go to the detective division, patrol division, that's where the soldiers go, and they usually get to, like me, I made it to sergeant, which I'm pretty proud of, but you don't get rank very often in the detective division. It's not easily done. So these guys gave up that promotion process because they like working gangs. And it's not that their hearts are not in the right place, it's that the administrators don't know how to use the program to its greatest effect.
We've come to the close of our part one of our interview with gang specialist Richard Valdemar. We want to thank him for appearing on Full Disclosure today. And we want to know what you, the viewers, think. What is causing the spread of gangs throughout the country? Is it poor police work that's causing the gangs to flourish? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number and let us know what you think at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777, and give us your opinion, and if you leave your name and number, we'll be sure and get back to you. Or you can visit our website at www.fulldisclosure.net and leave your comments there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. Now please join us next time for part two of this interview, where Richard Valdemar will tell us about the frightening relationship of local gangs with international terrorists, especially involved in cargo handling at our international airports. I'm Leslie Dutton. We'll see you then.
Full Disclosure is a non-commercial public affairs program sponsored by the Citizens Protection Alliance. For a transcript or videotape copy of today's program or a listing of airtimes and channels, call our toll-free number at 1-800-867-7777 or visit our website at www.fulldisclosure.net.
When I was showing the photographs of the inside of the cargo hold, I see all this graffiti, gang graffiti. Not only is it gang graffiti, but rival gang graffiti, where they've been crossing each other out inside the cargo hold.
Gang graffiti inside the cargo hold of a commercial jetliner? How could rival gang members gain access to the extremely vulnerable area? We'll hear from gang specialist and retired LA Sheriff Sergeant Richard Valdemar next on Full Disclosure. Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're going to bring you the news behind the news on this part two of our interview with retired LA Sheriff Sergeant Richard Valdemar. Mr. Valdemar is an internationally known expert on gangs and has been a regular law enforcement trainer and instructor for many state and national agencies. He's been featured in many television broadcasts on the gang problem and written several articles for various publications. We ask him to tell us who composes the Hispanic gangs that not only plague Los Angeles but now have spread across the United States. Are there a lot of undocumented aliens involved in these gangs? We asked him.
Until 18th Street, most of the street gangs, Hispanic street gangs, did not allow foreign-born members. So people from Mexico were not allowed in the gangs. 18th Street was one of those that broke ground and allowed illegals to enter their gang. But before that, that was not acceptable in most of the Los Angeles-based gangs. So that immigration problem comes about in the mid-60s. We started seeing a lot of that. Then again in the mid-80s when the Civil War in South America and Central America are going on, and we start another influx.
We asked Richard Valdemar to define the gangs in Los Angeles.
Our three major gangs in LA, I call them super gangs. Our super gangs, everybody's heard of 18th Street. Huge gang, probably the biggest in Los Angeles. The Salvatrucha gang, which is making national headlines now because I have this theory. The perception of the gravity of a problem is directly proportional to its proximity to the capital. Okay. It doesn't have anything to do with the gang itself. It's just another Los Angeles gang. But because it's close to the capital, in Washington, D.C., and there are senators that have been jammed by Salvatrucha members, it's suddenly the most important problem in the world. And then the third is Florencia 13. Florence is actually the name of it. It's named after the Florence district of Los Angeles and Florence, the street. And that's an old gang from, when I was growing up. So they've been around for a long time. Anyway, those three gangs are made up primarily of illegal aliens. They may not have been in the beginning, but they are now. And they also are the three gangs involved in a lot of the false identification trafficking. They produce false identification, registration for vehicles, passport, Social Security, immigration, paperwork, driver's licenses, and you can find them all over LA, and those are the three gangs that control most of that.
Where does the problem originate, we ask him? Is it the criminal element, the illegals coming from Mexico, that are causing the majority of our gang problem?
It's not Mexico that's brought the problem to us. It's the United States exports gangs, and we deport them to Mexico, but they learn their gang trade in LA. They go to Mexico and they create havoc in Mexico. We send them to Honduras, they destroy Honduras. They're so bad that they're actually threatening the stability of those countries. We don't see that. But if you go to Honduras, you'll see it's war. It's war with them. And El Salvador as well. And some of the other Central American countries is dangerous. These gangs are involved in Chiapas, Mexico, with the revolution that's attempting to get kicked off in that area. They smuggle human beings, or human traffickers. They bring drugs in the United States, and they produce this false identification stuff. All three of these things are a serious danger to our country as we know it. And we're seeing the results, unfortunately now, all over.
We're seeing the results all over. Gangs have spread from Los Angeles to every major city in the United States, and all the different law enforcement agencies in the cities and counties are attempting to deal with the problem. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we're going to ask Richard Valdemar about frightening stories that gang members are joining the U.S. military to receive sophisticated combat training and even weapons to conduct their wars on the U.S. streets. We'll be right back.
The website you've been looking to for accurate information has the best of Full Disclosure videos 24/7 at fulldisclosure.net. We're streaming TV's Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, uncovering waste, exposing fraud, revealing corruption. So even if you miss us on TV, we're available when you want to watch. We've got the latest information on upcoming shows, a cable channel guide, and news about special series. fulldisclosure.net, the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with gang specialist Richard Valdemar. NBC San Diego did a story last year about gang members joining the military expressly for purposes of learning weapons craft and combat techniques so they could bring the new skills home to their gang and make them better fighters on the LA streets. We asked Richard Valdemar if this indeed was a problem.
Yeah, that's been a big subject lately, and it seemed to gather a lot of momentum just recently because of the photographs we're getting back from Iraq. And the reason for that is this. The Army is so small that we have to have a lot of reserve units fighting with Iraq in Iraq. Many of those reserve units are military police or intelligence units, and what are they made up of? Made of police officers. These police officers are now in Iraq fighting, right? And they look in the wall and they see 18th Street, Mar Salvatrucha, Florence 13. And they recognize that graffiti is from gangs in Los Angeles. They photograph those things, they send them back home. They get out in the media and everybody's shocked. But the truth is, we've always had gang members in the military. But you had to give your allegiance over. You had to leave, Calle 13 and hang out with the Americans, right, and become an American. You had to give your loyalty over to the United States of America. Well, unfortunately, because the gang members today don't have the respect they once had for the military, they don't see that they need to give their allegiance over. They maintain their allegiance. Recently, the Iraq War, the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, I see a lot more of that. And they're not, the veterans that are coming back are not becoming, contributing members of society. A lot of them are remaining gang members. So in that way, we've even heard that some actually joined for the purpose of being trained in that, or their access to weapons.
Access to weapons? We asked him to clarify. Does he mean that gang members are getting their weapons from the military?
When we were working gangs in Linwood, we once found an M16 full automatic weapon, and its stencil on the stock was the Pendleton unit that it was assigned to, Marine Corps. So I personally called the captain of the unit, told him I had his his machine gun, M16, here, and he denied it. He said, "No, you don't have my gun. My gun's in my armory." I said, "I know this is your gun. It's a military gun. It's got your designation on it. I know it's from your unit." He said, "No, it's not." We went through this whole thing for about 15 minutes. Finally, he sent a runner to the armory, and sure enough, the gun was missing. And I had given him the serial number. So then he said, "Well, I'll send somebody down there to pick it up." I said, "No, you're not. This is in the hands of a gang member. This is now evidence. I'm just letting you know that you lost this weapon."
We asked him if this was a lone and unusual incident.
There was a riot in '92, the King riots. A Marine Corps unit established a ammo depot near Los Angeles for the distribution of ammunition should it turn into a armed military unit call out. Well, a lot of those rounds disappeared. And they disappeared because some of the people in the military unit, had friends that were gang members in the rioting. And so that happened. And now, today, recently, we had the pictures coming back from Iraq with the graffiti showing gangster disciples, the East Los Angeles gang members, Sureños, Norteños, Hispanic gang members, writing the graffiti in the walls in Iraq. So it's not new, but it's worse.
The gangs have migrated from Los Angeles to cities across the country. So what's wrong with Los Angeles County that we foster and export gangs to other cities, even to other countries? Richard Valdemar worked with the Sheriff's Gang Unit for 30 years. In our part 1 of our interview, he identified how the once effective Operation Safe Streets program is being watered down and misused. Is this the reason the Sheriff's Department can't stop gangs from flourishing in LA, we asked him?
There's numerous other administrative mistakes. The intelligence, most of the intelligence from the Sheriff's Department has been destroyed. We have some court cases that suggest that we have to purge files every 4 years and this kind of stuff. And we have what they call a risk management people who don't want to get sued, and so they want to comply with that rule and they destroy records. because they don't want to keep them over the amount of time that we're supposed to keep them. And I went to the administration, explained to them that there's exceptions to the rule. There's historical people, you know, like some of the founders of the Black Panther Party, you know, some of the originators of the original gangs, you know, heavyweight gang members from various prison gangs. Those guys fall into the historical category, and you don't have to purge them. But the risk management people are in charge. So they say, purge those people, purge them. Okay? So when you ask somebody from the Sheriff's Department about intelligence over 4 or 5 years ago, you're going to get this blank stare, because there's no one there with the background and experience who can pull up a file from that era. And that's sad to say. We also used to use, as I said, undercovers. I was undercover in the, you know, Brown Berets. We don't do that anymore. We don't have that kind of thing. So how are we going to get information about secret organizations if we won't gather intelligence, put it in files, and we don't put people undercover in there? They say it's too dangerous, yet we have famous cases of DEA agents or ATF agents entering the outlaw motorcycle gangs for a year, 2 years. They get to do it.
So gangs are developing like a cancer across the nation. Law enforcement everywhere is dealing with the effects. As an internationally known trainer, we ask him if he has seen successful programs in any of the cities that he's visited in the course of his travels.
There's a lot of cities, so they each have their own methods, but unfortunately, they're employing the same failed systems throughout the country, with a few exceptions. You know, trying to suppressive patrol and the you know, saturation patrol kind of stuff that doesn't work. And what I tell them, and when I teach this class to gang officers, I tell them about the Vietnam War again. I say, well, you know, we tried to go over to North Vietnam and we tried to bomb them, carpet bomb them, and we were going to drive them into the Stone Age. All it did was drive them underground, make them very angry and dedicated. When they came out of those holes, you know, I remember when I went to Vietnam, they were making weapons out of old pieces of steel. And when I left Vietnam, they were shooting our most sophisticated jets out of the air with their anti-aircraft equipment. Okay, so that's a quick, you know, movement from Stone Age to the advanced state that they became, and we motivated them to do that. Well, when you do suppressive patrol, the same thing happens. You go into the community and you suppress the gang members. Gang members know right away you're coming. They go underground. Then I use the example of in my own neighborhood, you're going to go to a liquor store, or you find out you don't have any milk in the refrigerator, so you send your 12-year-old son to go get milk at the liquor store because you don't have a market, you got a liquor store. So he gets on his bike and rides across a few blocks and winds up in the liquor store while this suppressive patrol is coming through. Okay, they've picked up a couple of prostitutes and crackheads, some old wino drunk gang members, and your 12-year-old kid. And they prop them up on the side of the car and search them, and they have to produce, you know, statistics. So they're going to take anybody they can to jail. If not, they're going to write a field interview report. They're going to go, you a gang member? And the kid's going to say no. Well, who do you back up? I don't back up anybody. I'm not a gang member. Well, you're here with these people. What gang are you from? I'm from Florence. Oh, you're a Florence associate. Take your picture, and it goes to the card file, right? So 12-year-old kid gets home late from the market with his loaf of bread or milk, and his mother says, where have you been? And he says, the police stopped me. They said I was a gang member. They roughed me up, right? Took my picture. Well, what do you think is going to happen? That mother's going to be on that phone calling the station. Not only that, that kid might have been in his heart always wanting to be a police officer, and that little negative contact he had is going to turn him around. He's going to now identify with those winos and the prostitutes and crackheads because they were in the same situation that he was. Okay, so suppressive patrol works as a temporary stopgap measure, but in the long run, it turns them against us, and it doesn't work. So you need smart bombs. Smart bombs are intelligence that works, and you give it to the right people who can go to that specific person that's creating the problem, and you take him out, put a case on him, take him to jail, send him to prison for the rest of his life. Right? You don't have to attack the whole city. You just have to attack that guy because he's the violent one. Every gang is made up of individuals. Some are more violent than others. Some are charismatic leaders. Some are followers. Well, if you get the proper intelligence, you can figure out who you need to put away, who's the danger to the community.
So suppressive enforcement is ineffective against gangs. In California, we enacted the 3 strikes law, where criminals convicted of 3 violent or serious felonies can be put in prison for life. Sheriff Baca has told Full Disclosure that illegal aliens who return to the United States are committing a felony and yet are deported time and time again. We asked Richard Valdemar if he knew of any occasion where the 3 strikes law was used to put away repeat offenders, especially illegal aliens.
They don't even apply it to them. I mean, they don't have a 3 strikes for illegals. Most of the time, unless they've committed a real serious crime in addition to being illegal, they're not even looked at for the 3 strikes law. But I've seen what you talked about there, where they've gone deported over and over again and keep continuing to come back. Now we have a federal law that says they're not supposed to do it. We also have a state law that says they can't come back and do that. But we don't see a lot of enforcement of those laws. And I don't know why, but we don't.
So the mindset in dealing with illegal criminals is different than
right.
a domestic criminal. Would
Right.
you say it is more lenient?
Yes. They don't want to be bothered. You know, the big machine, the system, court system, and our law enforcement system doesn't want to be bothered with these illegals because they tie up the whole system. So they just want to get rid of them, give them to the feds, send them back to their country of origin, you know, and we got rid of the problem. But that's not true. You know, they're going to be back. And many times we don't even realize that we've arrested the guy this many times because he's got false identification when he comes back each time under a different name or, you know, whatever, or he just gives a false name. And so it's very difficult unless you're under prints. You know, we're getting better at it, but we still have a way to go.
So there seems to be a significant problem with falsified documents. This could be a dangerous situation if police officers can't correctly identify who they are interviewing.
During the Mexican Mafia RICO case, all of the guys we arrested, all the significant members of the Mexican Mafia, all had good false identification that said they were someone else. But we knew who they were, so it didn't do them any good. But the fact that they've probably been stopped by 3 or 4 patrol officers during the course of the investigation and given this false identification, they didn't know who they were talking to. You know, I'm sure it probably would have given them a few gray hairs if they knew that they were talking to some of the most serious gang members in Los Angeles and not know it. And if they ran the license, the driver's license, it would come back to the person that is supposed to be, but it's not the guy that's in the car.
Richard Valdemar brought to light frightening evidence that gang members are working in the cargo holds and luggage areas of our international airports. When we come back, we'll ask him to explain this major threat to our airline security. We'll be right back.
Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure is streaming video on the web at fulldisclosure.net. Just click on our streaming page, select the show you want to watch, and get ready for the only Emmy Award-winning show to uncover corruption, expose voter fraud, and have its editorials rejected by the LA Times. Streaming video of your favorite Full Disclosure episodes when you want to know what the politicians are really saying. fulldisclosure.net, the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with retired LA Sheriff and anti-gang specialist Richard Valdemar. Richard investigated the unsettling discovery of gang graffiti found in the secure areas of Seattle International Airport. What he found was very disconcerting.
Yeah, I was actually contacted by a news person who wanted me to review some photographs. And this particular case was the Alaskan Airlines flight. This Alaskan Airlines flight was taking off from Seattle. And when it took off, they had a decompression problem. They had to land the plane, and they almost, you know, something serious almost happened. They found that they had lost the door, cargo door, or at least it had decompressed. And what had happened is someone had run a luggage ramp into the side of the plane and then not reported it. So when the plane went up to a certain height, the pressure blew the seal and decompressed the plane. It's real dangerous. When I was showing the photographs of the inside of the cargo hold, I see all this graffiti, gang graffiti. Not only is it gang graffiti, but rival gang graffiti, where they've been crossing each other out inside the cargo hold, which is very dangerous. And I mentioned to the reporter, I said, I would not only be afraid that these baboons are handling my luggage and fighting with each other in a luggage compartment, but they're going to bring a gun, because there's rivals and they're gang members. They're going to bring guns and you're just going to liable to have a shooting right there and then she told me, well, they actually did find a loaded gun on the tarmac. So I said, how did a loaded gun get on the tarmac, in the airport? And then I found out that these people don't pass through the metal detectors like we do as passengers. Because they're airline employees, they were going around the system and handling the planes and the luggage, without being checked. And obviously nobody did a background check on them because they would have found this gang history.
With such apparent lack of security and employee background checks, it seems very easy for a terrorist to get a job working in the luggage area of an airliner. These employees, is it possible that they are foreign nationals?
I'm sure it's possible that some of them are. I don't know what background check they did on them, but obviously wasn't adequate, and so they could be foreign nationals. We already had an incident here in Los Angeles. I think it was here in Santa Monica, where 2 gang members were arrested who had their own targets picked out. They were going to blow up a synagogue and some other things, and these were our regular African-American gang members from Los Angeles, but they were sympathetic to the Arab cause. So we had that. And some of the terrorists who already have been caught, or I think it was a shoe bomber, had gang ties as well. So there really has been a couple of these things. Libya gave money to the Al-Rukans several years ago, millions, and with the supposed intention that they were going to do something for Libya in a terrorist way. So it's not without precedence.
So even with all the inconveniences and humiliation of the current security measures, are we safe when we board a commercial airliner? Are major airlines doing anything to protect us from dangerous people having access to the vulnerable areas of the commercial aircraft? We asked Richard, does he see an ongoing problem with gang members working in airports?
Yes, there's a major problem with gang members working in the supposedly safe environment of the airport, especially when they're not going through the background that you and I might have to go through just to get on the plane. They're actually handling the plane and the cargo hold, where if I was going to put a bomb, the cargo hold sounds like a good place I might want to put it. And then the other fact that some of the graffiti was drug oriented. Okay, so they're using drugs, they're gang members, and they're inside your cargo hold. Somebody ought to be raising red flags. It's a real security problem.
We asked Richard Valdemar if he thought there could be a dangerous relationship between gang members and terrorist organizations. Could a Muslim terrorist convince a Hispanic gang to put a bomb on a plane?
If I was a terrorist, that's what I would do. I mean, we have a built-in army, right? And they're willing to do just about anything for the right amount of money or religious loyalty, because there's plenty of people being recruited in our prison system into the Islamic faith. Not all of them are Orthodox Islamic believers either. There's weird offshoots like Al-Rukans I mentioned, and who could be swayed for religious reasons to support the other Muslim, radical Muslims. So that could happen. When this first came to light over Mar Salvatrucha meeting with the Al-Qaeda leader in Honduras, right? There was a report that came out last year, I think. Anyway, the FBI was quick to deny this, saying, and they actually said this in a memo, which I thought was really ridiculous. how could Catholics, which El Salvadorians are Catholic generally, form these alliances with Muslims, you know? And I wrote an email back to the FBI saying, you ever hear of the Irish Republican Army? They were trained in, you know, Palestinian and other Muslim training camps, you know, and they of course have a relationship, and there's lots of relationships like that. It's silly to think that they're real true believers, you know, in whatever faith they might have started out with. They're terrorists, and they're going to use anybody they can.
So how do we get this intelligence, we ask him?
We need to monitor the subversive groups, even though it's politically, you know, incorrect. If we don't do that, this is the reason we're not doing real great on this war on terrorism. It's those subversive groups that are linked to the terrorists. And if we're not gathering intelligence and keeping it, then we're going to get blindsided again.
We want to thank gang specialist Richard Valdemar for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. After hearing Richard Valdemar's comments about how gang members are loading the luggage on airliners, are you concerned about booking a flight on the commercial airline? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777, and give us your opinion. And if you leave your name and number, we'll be sure and get back to you. Or you can visit our website at www.fulldisclosure.net and leave your comments. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. Now please join us next time for part 3 of this interview, where Richard Valdemar will tell us about the insidious corruption of our local cities by Mexican mafia as they take over local governments. I'm Leslie Dutton. We'll see you then.
Full Disclosure is a non-commercial public affairs program sponsored by the Citizens Protection Alliance. For a transcript or videotape copy of today's program or a listing of airtimes and channels, call our toll-free number at 1-800-867-7777 or visit our website at www.fulldisclosure.net.